I'm soaring, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. At a meeting of the Valdai Club of the Platform, Yaku Putin, I, as a rule, Vikristev for the most important for geopolitical forecasts and pogroms of the Russian Nachelnik, having made both direct and pogroms to the address of Europe and to the address of Ukraine. It was about Ukraine, then Bart himself rolled up the wagon on the fact that Putin is actually loaded with a new blow to the nuclear infrastructure of Ukraine. And we are fine with you, of course, not yet pogroms. We have already batched the Russians were at the place of the centurion of the Chernobyl nuclear glory. We're locally well informed. Still such blows. In fact, a serious problem for the reactor is not the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. That radiation Zabrod can become a serious problem on Tilky for Ukraine, for Belarus, for European territories. As we know, about Russians are engaged in Zalia. They absolutely bathe the same yak look, and the situation is out of their inheritance nowhere. Well, and I am still the Russian president, not ready to put all my threat away here. Signifying by his speech at a meeting of the Valdai Club. But, because we are, of course, not Tilky in words on the right. Another important point about me, we have little to say about the topic of the ledge, tied up, and with threats to the address of European edges. And we are still overgrown with Russian politics, looking like such a rank divide Europe and America. Pogru in Europe, and demonstrate readiness to get out of the administration of Donald Trump on the cola of the entire administration. Speaking from a tough covered Russian position. The fact that constructive Putin and absolutely unconstructive European leaders. I bring him from the United States, and with Donald Trump and all that Trump's initiatives. I am tied up from Maybutton by intelligence on injections of Russian-Ukrainian guilt could not be in. And here we will lead away those pogroms, Yaki overgrown we can smell the sight of the Russian president. According to the pogroms and the address of Europe, from European Ukraine on constructiveness. Then Russia's wildly crock on the hybrid war of Proto-Europe have already been here for them. And I may be on the was drones in the windy expanse of Poland, I may be on the was drones in the windy expanse of Denmark, are not marked in Sweden, Norway. Ukraine. By telling you about the whole story. We are, of course, perfectly on Putin's terms. Tied up and with Maybutton wiring for injections of confrontation between Russia and the sunset. Well, it's an absolutely obvious point. Putin also made his statements. I was just at the AFID summit of the European ones, which you visit in Copenhagen. We in the hall are handing over yet the very appearance on a drone in the wind, just Denmark was tied on a tilka. And with the fact that in Ukraine on the field yes helping Ukraine, and about our fate from Russian aggression. And literally through sprat days in Togo drones on the windy expanse of Denmark. Called before the closure of the airport in Copenhagen, Olbers, because of the Crimea. European leaders and the leaders of Ukraine of the European political elite have a little brother in Copenhagen for their summits. And it is absolutely not a horseshoe now of the summit of the European political spill notes in Copenhagen. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who told European leaders that Europe is at well. It is known about the hybrid guilt of the carved ones have died out and everything. And the bill of the Zahid leaders states the fact that Europe finds at and Europe accepted this on Maybutna. And I'm giving Russian-Ukrainian guilt. The wine will not be wrapped up by Shvidku. I will not act intensively on the Russian Federation with the idea of a wine scale against Ukraine. All the wine through the cordons of Ukraine, the wine will pretend to be a hybrid war of Russia against Ukraine, Europe, and hybrid wine against Ukraine. Europe will pretend to conflicts from NATO, and a hybrid conflict from NATO can pretend to be the third light fault, and with the annoyance of Putin's beloved nuclear arsenal. And it is extremely clear to say that no one loves the truth. Also, Russia from the receiving state does not like to shove a strategic nuclear dump to Moscow, Washington on the nuclear floor. With the script of our favorite presenter Dmitry Kiselev. And the torture is that history, the torture is the adoration of politics in their intentions. The spiral of the self develops into a big people pose of adoration and politics and peoples. Then the dickles are skipped fatal washings. And greedy politicians, greedy people, I am not worthy of such washings, and the spiral of escalation itself. And the President of the Russian Federation, you find just by unwinding the spiral of escalation in Yaki, can be thrown into the mind of his enemies. He has no way out to the fact that I will not yet unwind the spirals of escalation, the leader of the Poporov tiger. And Putin would have had a powerful political career and his ambitions as the hegemon of Europe. Well, we, of course, have not succeeded with Putin's European leaders since the roll-up. I took it in jail. An informal summit of the leaders of Ukraine and the European Union was held in Copenhagen yesterday. Today, the oyster pits in the European political split are the summit of the European Union. And the richly given political marathon, and Ukraine, we are with you, and that we, in principle, are holding Ukraine with you. It is in the center of the Vaga of all Poti. In the center of the Vaga is that Ukraine. I have discussed the main topic at the summit of the informal European Union, and at the summit of the European political elite, and, obviously, at the summit of the European Union. And to the fact that Bilsha also stood, it is obvious that we are in a cola situation, so otherwise. The continuation of Russia's war against Ukraine can turn into a war of Russia against Europe. It's already arrived. Hybrid bucket attack. It is necessary to say something else. I have some real collusion with the drive of those principled tortures. The yaks saw the European leaders at all these summits, and their summits are not Maya. Three-head moments, the leaders of the European Ukrainians of the Pershi moment, so the wall of drones is called. The same split initiatives allegedly did not allow the Russian Federation to stay away here, in this hybrid attack, the proteins of Europe, and the inclusion of Ukraine in the Tustina fraction, which, in principle, is theoretically on the trunk against the windy expanse of the eyelids, would come out often on the territory of Ukraine, and say they are frequent on the territory of Poland, and there would be a split European prost. Already at the informal summit of the European Union, it became known that French President Emmanuel Macron and the President and Federal Chancellor were not labeled Friedrich Merz. And, of course, for a secured moment, tied up with the fact that, in principle, the European Union. The fact that we, of course, then Macron and Mers says about the fact that it's a pity, it's such a folding problem. It's not possible to be ashamed of the fact that once again the Europeans are up to selling Russian drones. And you can use his missiles on the windy gist of Ukraine. I have overgrown the process of actually speaking clearly in Warsaw, and the Europeans do not love it. Here is Macron, having said that the species is behaved to drone strikes. In May it will be both strategic and ambiguous. And what does this mean? That the provocation of Poland-Estonia is hanging out. I think we have fairly touched the 4th article of NATO, and Prima. Before the dates of Force and Zasaby. Bilsha of the sky, and Bilsha did not strategically appear. I think your cats are important in the Matt's cheat message. Yaki drones can seriously destroy our windy passage, and that's the point. Well, you mail. And the drones were definitely scared. The pogrom of Macron. Is such a serious poll that they may be out. It also means a clear message of cola insignificance, and there can be no significance, and there is still. Such a drone will not come true in Kochov in the wind, just in NATO. Yak process by telling the Prime Minister of cleaning Viktor Orban. There are some walls on things for you, just these drones. I to the Europeans cannot be up to direct domesticity to the fact that be afraid of the Russian drone and rocket. In the process of shaking the peg President of the Russian Federation, and at once the heads of the Rada of Russia Medvedev are available. A direct blow, a direct attack on the Russian Federation, to allow Russia to see the kind. I am calling for all those Razmevs about the walls of drones, not just real houses, tied up, and with the readiness of European leaders. We'll cut out this power and doors so that drones come true with European dropped forces in the windy simple of Ukraine. Everything does not happen, so their decision. Well, an important point in the frequent discussions. Confiscation of frozen Russian assets in order to make Ukraine aware of the confrontation with Russian aggression, and visible outside of Ukraine. This is also a serious topic, and we are well aware of the President of the Russian Federation Putin, the alleged screw choir. The entire confiscation of such a few pennies can be a serious blow. The fact that Russia is frozen is still continuing to pump them and its own, and it will continue to insure them. And the Russian economy will not stand up. The Russian budget is in deficit, not in surplus recently. And the goal is to turn the surplus of the wife, and the deficit will be knocked down with a skin Ukrainian blow in Russian. On the autopair the deficit of the Russian budget, and in Russia, I will not just continue the unfair guilt of our Ukraine. Social stability. What does this mean in practice? Ostensibly, of course, what I said was the eye of European diplomacy, the peaking Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas on the truth. That Ukraine can pay for Russian Ukraine, Russian pennies can be paid. And a simple formula. These pennies are taught the view of Russia and Ukraine. Russian assets in Ukraine in brightness, reparations. And also Russia on the heat of reparations, insured corporations. And yet the aggressor is not warm. Well, then they will confiscate. The chain is a simple theme. Oleg, we are, of course, the unity of the European Union from the drive of frozen assets, to respecting the fact that information is being claimed that has already been achieved, then as a result of unity in May. We are not Bach. And we Bachel, and this was also said on the air from an oyster in Copenhagen, by the Prime Minister of Belgium. I'm still sleeping. The coalition is still hunting in May. The status of the coalition is tight, and I'm still members of the coalition. Will pay pennies for yes, I will help Ukraine, for and apparently for its opera of Russian aggression, then confiscate nothing. What is the position of the Belgian Prime Minister himself? The fact that the Prime Minister of Belgium of Ukraine is on deposit, they are not scattered across the European Union. They are not from the significant amounts received in the states there. Practically all Russian assets are located in Belgium, and Belgium, opposing that they were confiscated, or she is afraid of Russia's side pose, and she will be afraid of their financial system. Richly, who will be afraid, they also decided on the financial system of the SIGA of the European Union. Well, extremely, but I am categorically opposed to the confiscation of Russian assets. I am the Prime Minister of cleaning Viktor Orban, I am without him. I have clearly said that it is not like the confiscation, is not that the Europeans are not someone else's pennies. And so, it means that there are difficulties among the European leaders in May, and I would say, I will embroider with an important torture, because at a time I do not really bat you. You are the solution to the torture of confiscation of Russian assets. All of Ukraine are members of the European Union. I will continue the whole discussion on Dali. The third attempt about the need to say the defenders of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa, talked about the fact that they need a process in the stupas of Ukraine before the European Union. So here we are going to see the irreconcilable position of the Ugric Prime Minister Viktor Orban. I am still the Ugric people for the clay to bathe Ukraine in the European Union. The European Union has been persuaded from Ukraine about a strategic partnership, and not from Ukraine to the European Union. In the same way for NATO. I didn't logically explain my position. Defending my interests in theory, I was numb not in the fact that everything is simple within one civilizational framework, but in fact a bloc from the regions will survive the technical Transcarpathia. Ukrainian was in the European Union the mind of Ukraine, then I absolutely believe in the Ukrainian card. In the brightness of the Trump card in my election campaign. He, the infection, has an expensive election campaign in real May and in spending and Vlad. And before Orban, spending and Vlad in the future in spending and freedom, because everything is fine, of course, that it is corrupt. And there will still be real law enforcement agencies, the cleaners will investigate his activities. He does not, and Namaga is the Ukrainian factor for the parliamentary elections and for the European integration of Ukraine. And it's not that he doesn't have anything to load up and the cleaning and the distance. We in the hall are not formulas on the tilka of Ukraine's deplorable accession to the European Union, but on the cob of Ukraine and Moldova of a misdemeanor organization. Although all the procedures for screening legislation in Ukraine and Moldova have actually been completed. Searches of Ukraine are being prepared for real, and not for the alleged understanding that you will not be wonderful for an hour. And here is also an important point. Today, Moldovan President Maya Sandu was the reference heroine of the summit. The fact that she managed to literally snatch both pro-European, pro-Moldovan political forces in the elections about anti-Moldovan, pro-Russian, was symbolized by the pegged president of Moscow and, one might say, by the direct agent Igor Dodon of the socialists, Vladimir Voronin with the communists. Well, the same populist message is directed at the pro-Russian agent Elon Shore in the hall on the territory of the Russian Federation, along the ramp to the entrance of Ukraine. In principle, Moscow wiped out the Sprat so that the pro-Russian anti-Moldavian could win the elections in Moldova. For Tilke, he also needs to pretend that little Ukraine is a zone of instability. On the Tilke to the fact that Russia needs the Transnistria factor to actually occupy the Russian army enclave on the territory of Moldova, to provoke the protobrewery of Ukraine. And the fact that everything is fine in Moscow means that Moldova and Ukraine are going to join the European Union. And they know it takes a process to continue our to Ukraine political refrigerator right up to that hour by the Russian army. That the forces of occupation of their territory are driven to Russia. And of course, more pro-Russian forces will come to Vlada in Moldova. It's getting harder to the Don. The process of European integration of their own Ukraine, and hence Ukraine, so that even more cola will lead to torture. And Moldova will also need Ukraine. Well, the Corbyn politicians will act tough. Didn't come out. It is useless, since the plan did not come out, to separate Ukraine and Moldova before the parliamentary elections. In Moldova, another wave to the European forces in Moldova to win, and the elections with them will put Ukraine on a different plan. And the ATPR is brought to the Orban factor and his irreconcilable positions. It won't be that easy. There's also Bakim, the mountain prime minister, is in conflict with USID, and you know him today. If the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said Orban Chitko, and Orban said on the cleaning bot. Absolutely bullshit Orban on the bot of Russia. Because without seeing the national interests of cleaning, I said in the hall, the respectful policy of Orban anti-Ugric according to his judgment. There was also a handful of Ukraine, for which Russia chose freedom, and overgrown, and actually Prime Minister Gorshchin. Playing on the bot of the leader of Ukraine to traditionally, and in the 19th and 20th. Sprat took pleasure in the freedom of his powerful people. The people and memorable people fought for the freedom of the cleaning service. It was not Jacob in their known interest to the cleaning service, so that Ukraine became a member of NATO of the European Union. So that the cleaning service was not a cordon of NATO of the European Union. A complete idiot, of course. Orban, everything is fine, of course. We are, of course, tied from Moscow by interest, by sight. Orban looks liberal and democratic, and until that hour, he may have interests in contacts with Putin. And pretending to be a harmless and conservative right-wing populist. There you go. So in this way. Good nutrition. I hear can still for a year decla you unravel. And the European Union has a mechanism for applying to this cleaners for the continuation of Ukraine and Moldova, for a stupa to the European Union. That they will be shukadi mechanisms, according to the mechanisms we are not torture. And the European Union has mechanisms yet filed with this cleaning service, for the confiscation of Russian financial assets in a formula with a Belgian row. Not by, and you can find it. And it comes out with threats, with Putin's threats, everything absolutely turns out that Putin can be immersed in the Europeans. Both are essentially a continuation of a hybrid war. To talk about Europe in May, the kind of visibility 400s with the mayor in Ukraine. Europe is not Russia, but Europe, I will see the mayor in Ukraine. And in Putin, supposedly we have not seen you, of course. And Orban will be in these situations, in those situations of Russian interest, and speak about the European integration of Ukraine. On the topic of the summit of the European political leadership today, we say that Russia needs to accept the war. And from torturing Yak. And Vita Ratsmova about Russian assets. And I want to turn on one more phrase. Allegedly, now the whole European oyster in the press conference of the Prime Minister of Denmark and the President of Ukraine. The mind with the head of the European Rada Antonio Co, that Kola Matti Frederiksen said, Europe Maya. As if exiled in style, has not yet seen the wine against us, and well, I can say, and what I say. With what rank can Russia's war against Ukraine be turned out? Not Razmov, and with Putin, non-contact groups, not adoration and Putin. I voted 2000 of the 19th rock 7300 of hours with you. I have demonstrated my complete misunderstanding of the political situation in life, and the prospectuses are far away and on a simple share. Well, we did not bully the exiles in Russia, did not respect that she could have us for another 3 months. But for Putin's guilt we continue literally. And the torture to Europe. From Ukraine it is clear, Ukraine has passed with Ukraine finds, not knowing Ukraine actually, with pocket sin on understanding the situation. The global sin of the day of our independence. Ukraine, you. And Europe is supposedly in the hall, and she is afraid of selling one unfortunate Russian drone to the exiled. At the Imperious in a windy way, it's just that I'm already going to punish the windy pro of Ukraine. Yak Europe and exiled that she is afraid of selling one unfortunate Russian or so. I'm already going to punish in Ukrainian software, I just go about windy not in NATO. And then the Russian you flew to Estonia, I got home and got myself back. And there was also a favorite Russian order, our MiGs will land in Riga. Prices are just the words of revanchists on Putin. Yak Europe may be exiled, she is afraid of confiscating Russian groves. Yak Europe can be exiled, it can't be on the right and Russian NAFTA, and forget both Buck and Trump. Torture and in appearance, I will not look at them yet, behave real. European wine and richly who of the Europeans. There will also be such drones, bombas, shelters, rockets, the death of loved ones. Just frequent European political landscape. 20s, 30s, and maybe 40s, rocky 20 meetings on the fact that a strong Russia. Because the fear of guilt, like the holy guilt of a friend, is actually very important to praise and the right foods. To save power choices in the decision of a politician. Resiliency does not exude. The readiness of the famous prom and the reality to waste. And on the tilka itself in Europe from those obtained in the States. Donald Trump is pursuing a policy in terms of promo for the policy of real relations with Russia. Such frying does not take place. Russia does not believe words, Russia does not believe tears, Russia believes jokes. I meet and Namagini trampolines and beauties. So we will be oysters at the highest downpour in Copenhagen. Sasha will give a symbolic, but not a real effect on the tilka. And we will rise to the Europeans, I would say so, the same realistic buckets of threats from Putin's side. At least at that summit of the European Union. At the summit, I will tell you about the formal documents of the European Union in Copenhagen. The reaction is still serious. I'm on rich. Here we are richly talking about the summit of the European political split was an extremely good idea. The Prime Minister in the Uckstarmer, in one of the main characters of the day, there is still about the mind. With the European leader of the spiel about emigration. Emigration is illegal. To Copenhagen, pot to London. After that, it became known about the suicide of 2 Jewish people, of a similar terrorist act against a synagogue in British Manchester. And it's the rats running out. And I would say no, European politicians can't mark. Even in Europe, the spiral of anti-Semitism is mentally unwinding, and the statue is one of the elements of instability on the continent. And the stylish hands of ultra-right political links will tighten the screws. Horseshoe speech. After all, the prism of the 30s hands. A weasel. Subscribe to the channel. I will be in Dayak to the skin, and push in Dayak to the skin, to put a Podobaiku in Dayak to the skin. Who will comment on who you will arrest with the tools of the channel? We are with you on the channel millions besides. The skin is so important to me, and at a time I'm already on our air with my ass on frequent torture. Soaring from Warsaw. On your Dumka Europe, you are seriously betting on a threat in Russia. But I'll tell you, I'm getting serious from the point of view of drains, and not from the right. Today, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk Czergowa, speaking on the topic of the summit of European political spilliness. And it is absolutely audible that the Europeans, of course, still find Europe in wine. I've already heard all of Tusk's words. Such a real speech. And for discounts, Europeans prepare real actions. This is good food. And of course, we are still Europe seriously about the threat to Russia. We will at least visit the cut-off unmanned zone of Ukraine and Poland. You can also hold summits to speak from the prom, and not the real one, to show your past diet. And the light financial rat can swim to the Postachat goods to move the values of Russia. Of course, Kim Chin is a wholly financial rat, tied up with the fact that I will move the goods under Russia. We don't tank the financial rats. A friend can't shoot down everything. According to her, it is absolutely obvious that it is political for China and Russia to help. The torture of economical Zatical China. The torture of the sleepers for Russia till and on himself tied, and sent a call, that is the same and absolutely real. And the same for the political roots of the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation. What the Russian Federation also respects is that it wants to conduct a light fault in order for China to connect. But absolutely I will connect. Of course, and China. In principle, I don't think Russia wants to be a provocateur. Russia wants Russia not to take the fate of the missile defense of Ukraine. Because Ukraine and SNU and on the political mafia retinue Dayakuyu entry. And I will still find myself helping our Ukraine. By chance, a serious problem is tied up with ours, and Russia wants this and the sunsets of Europe, because, of course, the United States will help Ukraine less with it, and Europe is Bilsha, then Russia will still be on Ukrainian soil. In this attack of its own. This is the Ukrainians before the surrender. And the third test of the saint. The test is absolutely specific. Namaganiza. The city is rich in our broadcasts about tomahawks entertained by Trump on Putin. And everything is just filling the ether with manipulative comments. This is how it looks in the sunlight. Indeed, the president of Ukraine is up to the president with the received in-state propositions on the dates of the American administration. They are not signals in Putin's big, absolutely serious, absolutely real signals are tied to the fact that the Americans do not think about them. And what Putin means in Ukraine is Russia. Russia is supposedly, of course, and really is in an economical twist. Not yaks are not profitable. The real budget of the Russian Federation is significantly cut into the result of the budget of 2 or 3 rocks and volumes. Meaning with such a budget, Russia cannot fight another Rocky Sprat, in this meaning Russian to fight and not knocking down. And this means that it is, of course, on Tilka in Moscow. And I'm manipulative topics. Just the skin themes of Shvidkov's twisted guilt, then extremely respect manipulative. I'm choking on God for a richly personal process, I'll tell you now. Such guilt can continue until Rocky, and conflicts up to 2030. We are already overgrown by the 11th Rick in the conflict, and the third and a half, and the horns of Rick, have a normal tempo. Normal. And we need everything that will be punished in Rocky before 4. But I will help and come in. From the conflict with 30-40 Rocky to 25 will be punished. Then they shoot for their destabilization of the Russian economy, about guilt in the hot phase. Because Poku and Russia will be penniless people, Russians will fight. The topic has an essence not with their not Vlad. And are you also talking about the conflict on the 30-40 Rocky in the Russian-Ukrainian? Trampling is not just in Russia, but also a counter to the Zmin in Russia. And in Ukraine, I'm coming in. Because otherwise, there will be a new wine on the tick from Ukraine. Why Ukraine has been scouted in the United States for Russian self-driving factories. And there are also a lot of software projects at self-driving factories by Ukrainian projects organizations. The torment is not in who is in the project, that's where the factories of the ancient one are in the gap of the point. And some values are some Ukrainian design organizations still, and my values are off for a month on Earth. And Putin. Realities on Earth. Pan Vitaly, richly my fellow countrymen in Chernihiv, blows on the whole topic, for the whole winter. And I think this is a test for Chernihiv, for all regions of Ukraine. And you and I have experienced more than one we can live. This is an absolutely normal camp of Ukraine. You find yourself in Vienna, experiencing the head of winter, and fighting for the fact that electricity was visible. You understand, in the castle, you hand over generators in all Ukrainian, for the 23rd lesson of the 23rd lesson. You can repeat this extremely. Just set up, I go for a long period. Not the hysteria of long guilt, the guilt of food, is it not the understanding that the long guilt is still us? You are guilty of bilsh with a date, and on the roses, so lower, to 2020. Other Ukrainian looked absolutely unremarkable in the hall on Ukraine by the noblemen of long guilt. And do not wash the guilt of the Russians, and we know them. The torture is not that it will be dark in winter, but that someone else's army will pass. You have all been vaccinated. That's how I chose. So it is necessary that you have solved these problems as they occur more than once everywhere. Whether it is not visible in this energy to be added with the entry into such situations. Nothing is overstated by an hour of guilt. Wine, wine. It seems to me already about the fact that you are in a dirty place on these accounts. The eyelids are served light, according to the proportion of undead people in the trenches. With the skin crock of escalation, Europe will lay everything from Ukraine. Das with drones? Then it is possible to tell still a link Ukraine standing a bill of the subject and having floated on Europe. You can. I love it so much. This is an absolutely Lushnaya thought. With the skin rock of guilt, we of course, that guilt will technologically change, and it will change. Because the greatest technical progress for anyone is the progress of death. And in the light of two armies at a time, I, of course, allegedly fight in terms of a technological breakthrough. Drop the forces of Ukraine and drop them from the Russian Federation. The two armies of the retinue I am and are waging a droney war. And we are perfectly fine, of course, even dropping the Russian Federation will be in someone's topic of dossier. The Chinese in the pub Korite and Ranty. Stvo for them tesh for successful guilt at Mabit. And I will still be but a technological breakthrough. Russia sings that the army. And the armies are penniless because they are engaged in old technologies and approach. And you are still for the Western Ukraine Tilka 1 army, surrendered them to the squeezed into the Ukrainian army. Then you are absolutely to the right. Respecting the subjectivity of Ukraine as with the military retinue, as incredibly Shvidkov-Zanu retinue conflicts. And guilt of pretending to entourage into the arena for hybrid guilt exit. Extremely Ukraine can have us lower. I'm with the Russians. I still hybrid guilt can be replaced by an electoral mood according to the visible orders. Then the sweetness of democracy is politically acute. That's what I'm telling you about Maya Sandu. Kola, we discussed the situation, tied up for, and appeared at the summit of the European political Spielnote, and I'm all happy Vita. What is not possible with anti-democratic and scrapping, and according to the rules of democracy. Democracy, so that the same thing becomes clear about the presidential elections in Romania. TikTok candidate tied from the Kremlin did not become the president of the state. And this was also tied to the understanding of our real approach in the presidential parliamentary elections of the Republic of Moldova, and that we want to think for democracy, and to think in such a way that the political forces of democracy gained participation in the elections and fooled people's heads. Illegal finance. I've already made a wish. I'm in the 2004 kind. I'm a fig. I'm still Yanukovych Falk of elections, in there needed to be shoved and elections. Even in Yushchenko and Yushchenko, I was not tied up as a candidate. The specification of the selection. Well, what is Yushchenko, and what is the victim of falsification, really? It would be the right one. Here Yanukovych demanded Rivno, so kicked out. From the elections into the pit, and kicked out Klin George. No one wanted this in our country. And from all the way down, I was at Maybits. Can you explain why Ukrainian Vlada is not getting sanctions against China? Ukraine, yes, helping to sell us. But it is possible in this that we will not be able to take drones from them. We will also have sanctions against China. And we will not be able to work richly with speeches. We will also have sanctions against China. You know, sanctions, and I would say in our economic fallowness, including the whiskey fishing complex. And Comrade Podvini Prich from China. Putin, of course, will go through escalation and continue to blame, but it is devastating, but doubtful. And understanding success is the result. I think that Kremlin analysts have already brought 1 million additional speeches to Putin in the process. The torture is that at a time, the one who respects him needs to punish, but will notify more, let's say. Look. So I'm not the whole of Ukraine. And I will continue this guilt. Yes, I will be able to spend hours on Ukrainian territory. Girlfriend, I'm going to the Russians to win demographic blame against the Ukrainians in the narthex. And the nation was a competitor of the Russians in European dress and in Russia. In the narthex, Ukraine is rotten to mind. Maybe I will achieve a complete degradation of Ukrainian. Even the Ukrainians themselves have removed the pro-Russian Yuryat. There are no prospects of guilt. Well, you can also have a gut with a mouse. Haina mouse is not possible, but it is not possible on this such a sweet disappeared. And well, she can't do good. That's still a Mishka, but Putin's logic. Respects, and in real Trump's ideas are belittled by Putin's side. Filled right up on the style on an old friend. But we don't know that Trump respects him, that Putin is building him, disappointing him. What can be so low? Well, I think something else with the receipt of the states will push us divorced information, for Bilsh accurate strikes on the Russian. On the automotive market has already scared. I'll tell you another sprat place that the United States has raised scandals in the Oval Office. With the exchange of intelligence information from Ukraine. I couldn't. There was a wealth of information. The fact itself. I was thinking something, and got intelligence information from our country. And the PPR, they think, has leaked new intelligence information to us. So that we are on the self-defense enterprise of the Russian Federation. The Russian economy. So I will also give us missiles, long-range radio judges for strategic Russian facilities. Believe me. And Europe has good-naturedly worked on the staff for all this with its humanitarian law about Russians. For an hour they will put it up to the Europeans. Well, that's how rich it is in Europe too, on the VD visa of Russians. Richly respecting tourism in Russia and Indo-Europe, to put it mildly, in the current political situation. I'm still you just about sound. And so the folding torture on the Russian position at a time was caused, I imagined, as a platform for dialogue with the Parliamentary Assembly of the Rada of Europe. That is, you throw out the seams of the turnaround process of making a joke in the Kremlin regime. Behind your shade, there are still ideas from Europe, and you will lie and see the intensity of escalation on the European continent. The logic is that you and I and the escalation of the Russian Federation are really escalating gatherings by raising Putin. And I think it's too early to make nonsense about the peacefulness of Russian politicians. We will do it according to the directory. I would say I don't like dieting in Europe. That's right. And in the fact that the situation is developing, the smell is streaming downwind. All of course. And the situation can develop. I think that there are not many carefree and peaceful places in Europe in 20. He's also serious. But the prices of Europe are hanging out, so we will not live. Dyakuyu. Subscribe to the channel, and we will continue to talk about current politics, and the leaking of the temper on the rips of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and the pace of the release of their guilt in the 20s. Put in a similar way, supposedly, the pace of wiring on the European continent of the bins on the Russian-Ukrainian front. With tools and helps the dumped forces of Ukraine to gather, including on the old-fashioned people you trust, including on my old-fashioned social Facebook. And today, on the same sending, I am elected to work further away and on Facebook, the Ukrainian temples help in a glance. We have the feat of the Russian-Ukrainian confrontation, and the guilt of the reset will be the guarantor of Ukrainian independence and sovereignty. And we are firm a carefree Europe. I will both show up again the way we would like.